company is Melbourne-based, and we are focused on developing novel antisense compounds for diseases where there's a need for improved therapies. The drugs that we have in our pipeline, we've acquired those from large or major biotechnology company in the US called Ionis Pharmaceuticals. And we have worldwide exclusive licenses to all the drugs in our pipeline from that relationship with Ionis. Our pipeline consists of a drug called AT1102 and AT1103, both of which have achieved positive phase 2 clinical trial results, where we're looking to leverage those trial results with the continued development of those programs. Very pleased to say that we have the backing of two of the key institutional investors in the sector in Platinum Asset Management and Australian Ethical. Australian Ethical now have just over 19% ownership in the company, and recently participated in a very focused financing that we undertook to look to move our drug for Duchenne's forward with respect to the planning for the next clinical trial. Next icon there on the slide highlights that, as I said, the focus of the company, which Scott mentioned. That's our phase 2 clinical trial of AT1102 in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. We're well into that study, and we are anticipating study readouts before the end of the year. But being an open label study, we still believe there's an opportunity for preliminary data to be presented on that drug before the end of the year. And I'll touch on that a little bit later in my presentation. With AT1103, where we've shown positive results of the drug in a disease called acromegaly, we're looking to set up what's known as an early access program, where non-registered drugs that have shown positive data in clinical development can be made available to patients to treat those diseases, looking to establish an early access program in Europe, going to those countries where we can seek reimbursement for the drug supply. So looking at this as potential income-producing opportunity for us. So just touch on briefly as to what is the technology, antisense technology, and how does it work. I guess simply put, antisense drugs are small pieces of DNA, and they're designed with a drug-like qualities which allow them to bind to their respective RNA to block the production of specific disease-causing proteins. So these drugs are very specific for their target. They're, as a consequence, regarded as sort of highly potent and well-tolerated medications. We have access to these compounds, as I mentioned earlier, from our partner, Ionis Pharmaceuticals. Ionis have 40 of these drugs in clinical development at the present time, either in their own pipeline or through partnerships such as they have with Antisense Therapeutics, but also with some of the major pharmaceutical companies, Biogen, Pfizer, Roche, all have partnerships with Ionis. Importantly, commercialising the same technology as Ionis has made available to us. Recently had a third drug approved with the European Medicines Association, and so we think that provides fantastic validation for the programs that we're running at Antisense Therapeutics. So this slide just highlights the pipeline and where we sit with these programs. Important again to emphasise that the company's been focused on going into disease areas where there's an acknowledged need for improved therapies. So with Duchenne's, we're running the phase 2 clinical trial at the Royal Children's Hospital, and anticipating news, we hope shortly, on the enrolment status in the trial. And we're confident, though, that the dosing will be complete with trial results to report before the end of the year. AT1103 and acromegaly, I highlighted earlier, the focus is this early access program. We've got drug compound that we've made for that program. It's ready to be shipped to our partners in the Netherlands, a group called My Tomorrows, who specialise in running these early access programs. We're really just now working through the necessary documentation to get the product released into their warehouse and then go on to seek the appropriate approvals in Europe. We also have H1102 for multiple sclerosis, just given the time constraints. I won't go into that today. Only to say that we think that if our drug program in Duchenne's shows the requisite activity, we think that that would reinvigorate this program and put us in a position to move that drug aggressively back into development. So what is Duchenne's muscular dystrophy? I guess the first feature of it is that, and it's a bit of a sobering one, is that it is the most common fatal genetic disorder of children. And it's caused by a genetic mutation that stops the boys from being able to make a key protein called dystrophin, which is required for muscle function and regeneration. So these boys don't have the ability to make a sufficient amount of dystrophin. And over time, this lack of dystrophin leads to progressive muscle loss and wastage. The boys initially lose the ability to walk, end up having to move into wheelchairs, and then again over time that the boys start to develop a failure of other organs and systems of the body, including the lungs and the heart. So, as I said, the sobering feature of this disease is, unfortunately, it's 100% fatal. So most boys don't live beyond the second decade. However, we are, and as are other companies, looking at developing therapies to help the boys, at least in terms of slowing that disease progression. And in 2016, late 2016, was a key development for the boys with Duchenne's, and that was the approval of a drug called Eteplirsen, or Exonidus 51, a company called Sarepta were the marketers of that compound. It became the first drug approved for restoring the dystrophin levels in these boys. It said that the genetic mutation they have meant that they weren't producing enough of. So that drug, though, is only relevant to the 13% of boys that have that specific genetic mutation. So it's not for all boys, but it was a key advance in the field. And so one of the issues with Duchenne's is that, and the aspect of the disease that we're focused on, which is the inflammation associated with it, is that chronic inflammation that comes because the boys aren't making enough dystrophin actually leads to fibrosis and a more rapid disease progression. So the only way of treating that today, so the inflammatory component of it, is through the use of corticosteroids. So corticosteroids, approved 60 years ago, they're reasonably effective anti-inflammatories, but have some really substantial side effects when used chronically, which is what they need to be used in the boys with Duchenne. So essentially, once they're on it for life. And the issues, that they face with chronic use of steroids include abnormal weight gain. They also affects the growth in the boys. So it's a growth retardant, causes bone demineralization, osteoporosis. So here are boys that are already, suffering with loss of muscle function, which is, only exacerbated by the side effects. So our drug is focused on treating the inflammation. What we think is that that's going to facilitate potentially the benefits of a drug like Exonidus 51 or Eteplirsen. So we can see a future role for using, say, our drug in combination with the drug Eteplirsen. I'll go into that a little bit more detail in my presentation. So what were the sort of drivers for us moving into this particular indication? So as I said, first up, companies wanted to be in disease areas where there's an acknowledged need for Duchenne's. And as I said, I think this is an obvious candidate, Duchenne's, in that they're, beyond corticosteroids, nothing for these boys to treat their inflammation. And the other feature is that, it is an orphan drug disease. And so there are important incentives or benefits that come for pharmaceutical companies focusing in this area, including additional intellectual property protections and also support from regulatory authorities in getting advice and in working through the approval process. And so that's something that we're now envisaging. And I've got a slide in this later in my presentation talking about the next phase of development for this drug, where we're going to be interacting with these reg authorities. So this aspect's going to be important for us, the notion that we will get help or advice from the reg authorities, because it is a rare disease. On the left-hand side of this slide is a picture of a publication of data of a use of our drug AT1102 in multiple sclerosis patients. So this drug has previously been tested in MS, and we showed in MS patients that were dosed for 2 months only with the therapy, where we looked for the effects of the drug 1 month past the last dose. We were able to show, as the slides highlights here, a 90% reduction in the number of new inflammatory lesions, which is what MS is. It's a disease associated with inflammation of the brain, causing lesions in the brain. We reduced them by over 90%, which was really unheralded data at the time that we reported, and that's why we got the publication here in the prestigious Journal of Neurology. And so, it's really been the preclinical data, so our safety data that we generated on MS and this clinical experience that's encouraged us to move forward into Duchenne's rather. And so, in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, we were able to jump straight into effectively a phase 2 clinical trial where we're dosing boys for 6 months, because we're able to leverage this clinical and preclinical experience in multiple sclerosis. But the other thing it does, it encourages us that this drug, which was active on inflammatory lesions in the brain, could work in Duchenne's, which is, as I said earlier, an important part of the disease process is the inflammation in the muscles caused by the lack of dystrophin. So on the other side of the slide is another seminal publication that really was the main driver for us to jump into this particular indication, and that was that researchers in Brazil and France had published data on the role of CD49D. And CD49D is a receptor on the surface of lymphocytes, white blood cells, and its role is sitting on the surface of these lymphocytes is to bind to blood vessel walls and to allow the white blood cells to move from the blood into the tissue, so as a way of being able to fight inflammation and infection. So what these researchers showed was that this particular receptor was more highly expressed. There was more of it in boys that had Duchenne's, and particularly more of it in boys that had a more rapid and severe progression with their disease. Why relevant to us, and I haven't highlighted that, is that our drug targets CD49D. So our drug is all about reducing the levels of CD49D on these white blood cells. And so the researchers pointed out in this publication, said, look, this looks to be a really interesting phenomenon. These boys have got lots more CD49D, or at least white blood cells that have got high levels of CD49D. So it looks like a good marker of disease progression, but also could be a very exciting immunotherapy target. And so it was a combination of the fact that we had the data in MS that showed that we were working on inflammatory processes in multiple sclerosis, combined with this validation that was coming from these French-Brazilian researchers that said that we should move this drug into Duchenne's. And so, the process, and I won't labour on this, but we once we came to this view, we went to speak to Oz Ethical and Platinum. We did that, under CDA with them. They did, we'll spend a lot of time with them, and it was really their support of the program and the financing that we did back in 2018. Which we raised money at 2.3 cents with a market cap of 5 million. People thought that we were really up against it to be able to do that type of financing with quality institutional investors like that. But it was that support that really led to where we are today, which is not far away from being able to report on data from boys with Duchenne's, and that's what this slide here points out. So we're running the study at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, who run the biggest clinic in the Southern Hemisphere, treating boys with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. We're dosing for 6 months in the boys. I think I highlighted that before. So we've gone straight into a 6-month dosing study. What's important about that is we think that that duration of study will give us an opportunity to be able to monitor the drug's effect on not only markers of inflammation and muscle damage, but also on disease progression. And in this circumstance, because we're studying the drug in boys that have actually progressed to the stage where they're no longer walking. So these are wheelchair-bound boys, non-ambulant boys. We're going to be monitoring the drug's effects on disease progression in terms of their ability to use their upper limbs, so upper limb function. So we're going to be monitoring how much function they have at the start of the study to the end of dosing. And what we know from published literature is that even non-ambulant boys that have been on high doses of corticosteroid show a loss in muscle function over that duration of therapy. So, what we're hoping that we'll be able to show is an improvement of muscle function, and an improvement could be just slowing the loss of function or maintaining it. And so, that's why we're really excited, about being able to run a study for 6 months, because if it was a shorter duration of trial, we wouldn't expect to be able to see those sort of changes or be able to have an impact on those. So we'll be monitoring for those in the trial. We are expecting results in the fourth quarter of this year. Those who follow the stock will know that we're due to say something on enrolment, final enrolment. We're hoping to be able to have that news out shortly. But even with that, in the absence of that news, we are confident that we will have trial results out before the end of the year. But with the possibility, as pointed out here in the last bullet point on the slide, because it's an open label study, that should there be meaningful data presenting earlier than that, data that we think sufficiently robust and that we're confident enough to disclose to the market, then there may be an opportunity for us to say something earlier. We raised money 3 months ago with the purpose in mind to look to start planning for our next study of this drug. And so what we did was we engaged an international regulatory consultant. So these are highly regarded group who have in their team of reviewers a number of regulatory agency reviewers. So in this circumstance, we're going to look to run a process in Europe. So the team, the regulatory consultants we work with, had people who were EMEA reviewers on their staff. And what they advised us was, having reviewed all our existing preclinical and clinical data, so this is the data that we generated in multiple sclerosis, they were of the view that we could go today to make an application to the European authorities without the data that we're generating here, in the existing study at the Royal Children's Hospital, and make a case for a phase 2B clinical trial program dosing for longer and higher. So on that basis, we decided that we would run that process in parallel with the existing trial. And so what we're doing now is we're putting together the data packages to go get what's known as scientific advice from a couple of the national authorities. So going to the independent regulatory offices of certain countries in Europe. We have in mind to go to those that are viewed as kind of having the strongest voice or the most influential in Europe, get advice from them, and then go to the European Medicines Agency with our plans for the phase 2B trial. And so what we're hoping in that process is that we will also be able to get advice on the development path to get this drug approved. And what we're also thinking is, based again on advice that we got from our consultants, that this next study, this phase 2B clinical trial, may present as an opportunity for us to set the study up where, if we achieve, what the regulatory authorities would like to see us achieve in those studies, so meet the endpoints, we know they'll be around disease progression, the ones that we highlighted before around what we're doing to what effects we may have on the upper limb function of the non-ambulant boys. It could present as opportunity for potentially conditional or an early approval. So that's what we're going to be moving forward with, and we'll be looking forward to report on the progress that we make there. We're moving the program forward, with the support of some very experienced and highly credentialed scientific people within the DMD community. Highlighted there are the two investigators on our study, and Professor Monique Ryan, in her own right, is seen as being an international expert in Duchenne. So we're delighted that Monique was keen to be involved with our trial. And I think it just represents that not only their interest in seeing new therapies come through, but I think specifically in this opportunity to test a drug in patients who are non-ambulant. A lot of the development that has occurred in clinical developments occurred in Duchenne's to date has been in ambulant boys. And so, us moving forward with the program in non-ambulant patients, is seen as being quite, exciting because, there is a population where there's not much happening and there's not really great prospects for, new therapies come through. So, I know Monique and other investigators that we're speaking to keen to see us continue down this path in the non-ambulant boys. Professor Steve Wilton, he invented the drug eteplirsen, the drug that Sarepta now is, selling, I think, last quarterly report, over $80 million a quarter. Again, this is a drug that's used to boost the levels of dystrophin in these boys, but only effective in the boys that have the specific mutation. So, it's great to have, Steve on, on our advisory board. I would point out that Bill Goolsbee, who's on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, who's a non-executive director of Antisense, was the ex-chairman of Sarepta Therapeutics. And Bill introduced us to Steve. And I was saying earlier today that Steve introduces us to Monique. So that's how this process works. And the reason why we managed to get those great connections was really because Bill being on our board, and that was sort of somewhat fortuitous because Bill came onto our board to support us in in our programs before we'd actually identified Duchenne's as an opportunity. So it's been fantastic that we've had an opportunity to move into Duchenne's, given that's where Bill had been so heavily involved. This slide that I'm switching to here points out that Duchenne's is a multifaceted disease, and as a consequence, the companies are going about tackling it in different ways. So you've got companies like Sarepta looking at increasing the dystrophin levels, our own company looking at impacting on the inflammatory process, others that are targeting the fibrosis associated with it. You've got ones, as I said before, these boys succumb, unfortunately, generally to lung function failure or cardiac failure. So not surprisingly, there's companies in there looking to develop up cardiac and respiratory drugs to help these boys. Some are looking for increasing the levels of muscle. But the key feature of this is really just, I believe, is to highlight that that mostly this is seen as being more a complementary landscape than it is a competitive one. That is that an expectation that a number of these drugs will be able to be used in combination, and that also there's really not much development happening in certain of these areas. I mean, we are the only ones that are in development with a drug targeting CD49D for Duchenne's. With the knowledge that the French and Brazilian researchers were, very excited by the target. We're it, a little Australian company, many miles away from that group, and those researchers keen to be involved in the program, and one of them actually on our advisory board. But it's going to be it's an area where there's likely to be a lot of use of drugs in combination, but also with relatively speaking, a lot less competition, particularly where we are over here with treating the inflammation. At the moment, only the corticosteroids. I've touched on a number of these points before with the approval of Exonitis. I mentioned that Bill was the ex-chairman of the company, and we're benefiting from the networks and contacts that he has. The company, though, when Bill, he advised us this, when they decided they're going to develop a drug for Duchenne's, a market cap of 60 million, got approval 4 years later. Market cap went to 3 billion. Today, the market cap's 9 billion. And, their focus is almost exclusively in Duchenne's. And so all that value creation's come about by moving exonerates forward, but also adding to their pipeline by bringing in other, Duchenne's and Duchenne's-related compounds. And, what I might switch to is a slide here which we think kind of, illustrates this value, value creation. So over here, you've got when, Bill was telling us there was a lot of debate within their company because, when they talked about going into Duchenne's, back in 2012, the rare disease area didn't have the same sort of panache, or interest support that it does, today, And so when they were saying we're going to go into a disease where there's only 44,000 patients, he said they did get some resistance there, But, when they announced the results of their phase 2B clinical trial, you can see they had a sort of immediate impact on their share price. So over here, 6 billion, just with the reporting of results in phase 2B and out promoting that, no doubt. Market cap jumped to 1 billion. And we may have spoken about this last time when I was here, Scott, but it was a controversial, program with the FDA because they essentially got approval on the back of 12 patients' data, albeit with a lot of sort of safety data over an extended period to support that. But what they did, the data they had that they presented to the FDA was really just about their ability to increase the levels of that protein, dystrophin. So they weren't at the time showing that was having any benefits on disease progression. Weren't able to confirm that, and so that's why if you see here, there's a milestone that we've reported where the FDA started to raise, questions about whether dystrophin was going to be enough for them to get an approval, and the share price going pull back. And so, there was a bit of volatility over that period, but eventually the FDA, with a lot of, as Bill advises, with a lot of lobbying by the advocacy groups, the DMD advocacy groups, to get this product approved, even with the limited data, which was available there, because the view was that these boys have no other options, and so we as a community insist to be made available. So it got approved. Market cap jumped to 3 billion, as I said. Now 9 billion today. And I was just saying, I think what we benefit from is a lot of the groundwork that's been done by Sarepta, working with the regulatory authorities, giving them a sense of what's going to be important to monitor in Duchenne. So it's not an area where now there's lack of clarity over what we need to see, and there are more companies that are focusing there, but it's still somewhat virgin territory for companies like ourselves to come up with novel therapy. So I think we get the best of both worlds. That is at least a path that's been laid there for us by Sarepta, but in an area where there's not a lot of competition. And then, as I said, we've got Bill Goolsbee to be able to leverage from. So, Scott, I've got a couple of slides on the other opportunity in acromegaly. Maybe I'll just jump very quickly then, through this to say that, acromegaly is an abnormal growth disorder. It's caused by a pituitary tumour, and it causes patients to produce too much growth hormone. And the consequence of that is patients have abnormal growth, and that consists of the bones of the hands, face and feet enlarging and the organs of the body enlarging. So the way it's treated is to look to blunt the effects of that growth hormone. They look to do that by taking out the tumour. That's successful in only about half the patients that have it. Otherwise, you've got to go under chronic, lifelong therapeutic or pharmacological intervention treatment. And the way that is affected is to, as I said, try to reduce the effects of this abnormal growth hormone. Our drug, AT1103, is designed to block the production of a receptor, that the growth hormone binds to in the liver, stops the production of an associated hormone called IGF-1. Last point of this is it's the IGF-1 levels, the increases, that cause all those nasty growth effects. And the way acromegalics are treated is to reduce the levels of IGF-1 back to normal. In every study that we've conducted, and we've taken this drug all the way from preclinical studies through to 2 successful phase 2 clinical trials, we've been able to show we can reduce IGF-1 and in the phase 2 clinical trials, normalise IGF-1 levels. So we're, I highlighted this earlier on, we're looking to run an early access program, and the features of this are that if you've got a drug that you've shown to be safe and effective but not registered, you can make application to have your drug made available to patients. That's usually done through a physician. And so we're going to Europe, 2 reasons, because we've got a group called My Tomorrows. They approached us and said, we think you've got an interesting program, we'd like to work with you. We've got a lot of experience in Europe. We also know that in Europe, certain countries you can get reimbursed for therapy at the same cost of therapy as what's the drugs are currently made available at. So we know for a second-line treatment for acromegaly, about $100,000 a year for treatment. So we've got enough for 10 patients at the moment, with the ability to go back and make more if we get sufficient interest and support for the program. And we've been working with My Tomorrows for some time in building up the package, the manufacturing package and regulatory package to submit. We're making progress there, but slow going, because I think one of the features is that we're now contemplating a drug at the level of a marketed product. And so that's a lot different than when you're looking at developing data to support a drug in clinical development. So a lot of the expectations of these guys, and they believe the regulatory authorities would have the manufacturing data at a level of sophistication that would support a marketed product. So we're getting there, and we hope to be able to update on that shortly. I won't go through the board of directors. Just to say, we've got 2 US-based directors, and Gary Pace, who was up until recently 25 years on the board of ResMed. So Gary's great, and with his experience and his contacts, Bill that I've highlighted before, Graham and Bob, obviously stalwarts of the sector, and very, very, very stable board and highly experienced. Financial. So I think kind of what stands out to us was when we went to Ausethical and Platinum originally said, please, can we have some money to develop a Duchenne's program? The market cap was sub 5 million. We did that raising at 2.3. We raised the money most recently with Ausethical and Platinum at 3.3 cents, and yesterday pulled back a little bit, but at 5 cents, market cap now over 20 million. And along with Australian Ethical and Platinum, we have Leon Seri on the board. Those who have been in the sector a long time, like Scott, not oversensitised a long time here, but would know he's very much regarded as a biotech pioneer, and we've been greatly supportive of his financial support, and think that reflects the quality of the programs that we're running. So last slide. I think we're in a unique position compared to kind of our peers locally, with 2 advanced compounds that have shown positive data in phase 2 clinical trials, which we're looking to leverage. I think we're unique position also having a partnership like we do with Ionis, and the insight that we have into Sarepta through Bill's experience there. We've got 2 of the key institutional investors that are supporting the sector, and they've backed up again with the recent financing, increasing their holdings. Phase 2 clinical trial, I think I've talked enough about the features of that to say that we're really excited about pending results. And it'd be fair to say that could happen any time now, just because of the nature of it being an open label study. And the early access program, it's taken us longer to initiate than what we've anticipated, but we've learned a lot in the process. A lot of information, interestingly, around the manufacturer that's going to support us in the future for contemplating the further progress of our Duchenne's drug and our acromegaly drug. So it's been a bit painful, the delays, but as I said, I think ultimately could actually be to our advantage what we've learned in the process. Hey, thanks very much.